Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite genres, coming of age. Whether it be books or movies, I've always just really gravitated towards this type of material. I find there's just something really cathartic and comforting about this shared experience that we all have of immense change, usually in our teenage years. I would say the genre typically focuses on adolescence as well, so ranging from about 13 to 19. However, I've seen some really interesting contemporary examples of coming of age stories focused on a little bit later in someone's life. One of my all-time favorite examples of this is in the 2021 Norwegian film The Worst Person in the World. This follows our protagonist in her late 20s, early 30s as she grapples with changing expectations around love, relationships, career, and family. If you're looking for any other film recommendations, I really love 2011's Young Adult as well as 2012's Frances Ha. Today we're going to be focused on books. I have 5 recommendations in total that are some of my all-time favorite coming of age stories, and I'm so excited to share them with you. So let's get started. So these are in no particular order, but this first book is definitely one of my all-time favorites. I first read it at 17, and since then I feel like it's really impacted a lot of the books that I gravitate towards reading now, and that is The Girls by Emma Cline. So The Girls follows our protagonist Evie Boyd in the summer of 1960s Los Angeles as she falls under the spell of a Charles Manson-like cult. I would say Evie is particularly vulnerable as her father has just left her and her mother is coping in some maladaptive ways, leaving Evie really craving intimacy and connection. This is when she meets the girls of the cult. She is particularly enamored with one of the more devoted members named Suzanne. I always interpreted Evie's infatuation with the girls of the cult, particularly Suzanne, as her sort of coming to terms with what it means to be a woman in the world. On one hand, she has her mother as an example of the type of woman that she could be, and on the other hand, she has the girls on the ranch who just represent a completely different archetype. And you can see Evie who's pushing the limits and trying to decide what kind of person that she wants to be in the world. Reading The Girls always takes me back to this really tender place in adolescence. Although in adulthood, Evie recognizes sort of the darkness of her formative summer, she still tells the story with such an empathy for her young self. Emma Cline really beautifully encapsulates the extremity of every emotion at that age, the otherness that you tend to feel with your family, and how deep your infatuation with your first love can be. So for that reason, it's one of my favorites, and that is why it's on this list. Alright, so this next book that I would love to recommend, I don't have the physical copy with me right now, but I definitely had to include it because I believe it's the most famous coming of age novel of all time, and that is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. So Catcher in the Rye follows Holden Caulfield, this uber angsty teenage boy who goes on a bit of a journey throughout New York City after he's kicked out of his boarding school during Christmas time. He is so obnoxious and stubborn and annoying as a character, but at the same time I feel like he's quite a real representation of what it must feel like to be a teenage boy or to be around one. He's so extremely defensive. It always seems like he's trying to prove that he could be really smart and achieve a lot if he tried, but trying is stupid, so he never will. Although he is such an irritating character, I hate to say he is a little bit relatable in some ways. I think that sort of fake apathy is something that's really common in teenagers and something that a lot of us go through. I know a lot of us probably read this in school, which tends to take all the fun out of books. But if you haven't read it and you're looking to get into classics, it's a very fun one to start with. It's not a boring plot at all. I found it really hard to put down once I got started. And so for that reason, it is on this list and I would highly recommend. Alright, so the next book I want to recommend is another one that I have such a soft spot for. It's definitely one of my favorites, and that is A Complicated Kindness by Miriam Toews. So A Complicated Kindness follows our protagonist Nomi Nichols, who is a teenage Mennonite girl in a small Canadian town. After both Nomi's sister and mother go missing, she's left to live alone with her well-meaning but very uncommunicative father, Ray. Her uncle, who they refer to as the Mouth, is a very antagonistic figure, and he is the leader of their community. I find Nomi such a lovable and fun character. I think it's quite interesting because this book often gets compared to Catcher in the Rye, even criticized for being too similar to it. and Nomi is often compared to Holden. I can see the similarities in some ways, however, the way that I perceive Holden and the way that I perceive Nomi could not be more different. I think part of this is because Nomi has some very real restrictive forces that she needs to rebel against, whereas Holden just kind of comes off as bratty. I feel like there's a lot of legitimacy in Nomi's rebellion, and she lives in a very confining community. I would definitely recommend this one if you're interested in strong familial themes and different family dynamics. Maybe if you've grown up in a small town, it would appeal to you as well. But yeah, I would 100% recommend this one. Alright, so the next book I'd like to recommend is The Girl Who Was Saturday Night by Heather O'Neill. I feel like I don't hear Heather O'Neill being talked about enough, but she is one of my favorite authors ever. She's also a Canadian author from Montreal, and all of her books are set in Montreal. I find she really includes the city as almost another character, and I always love when books do that, and The Girl Who Was Saturday Night is no different. So this book follows our protagonist, Nushka Tremblay. She is 19, she's grown up kind of in the shadow of her famous folk singer father. She has a sort of a fame of her own. Her and her twin brother used to be included in her father's shows when they were kids, and so especially in her community she has sort of a name for herself. Her father is this very eccentric, kind of crazy figure, and her brother is getting involved in some sort of dangerous illegal activity, and Nushka's sort of discovering who she wants to be and who she is apart from her father and brother, who up until this point she's been very glued at the hip to, especially her brother. I really like some of the themes explored in this book about sort of breaking free of family. I think it's something that we can all relate to as we grow up, whether it be family or friendships. Sometimes it is just impossible to grow together and you sort of have to break off and do your own thing. I think Heather O'Neill is one of those authors that you either love or you hate. Her writing style is very unique and she has some really creative and kind of dark ideas, but I really love her, so that is why this one is on the list. Alright, so the last book that I'd like to recommend today is The Gossip of the Starling by Nina de Gramont. So this book is about a teenage girl who is sent to live at an all-girls boarding school in New England. This is where she meets another girl who's very charming and beautiful, and she spends a lot of the book enamored with her. It's very Americana, old money, horseback riding, and a lot of cocaine. It really reminded me of The Girls in the way that female friendship at that age can be so all-consuming. It can also be extremely codependent and filled with jealousy and toxicity. At the same time, I think those extreme friendships that you have at that point in your life can really shape you into the person that you become. I don't think that jealousy is always necessarily a bad thing. I think in the case of this book, it might be a little bit more toxic than positive, but I still think that admiration is a really interesting theme to explore in these books. I would say this is sort of a cross between The Girls and Gossip Girl. All in all, it's a really fun world to escape into, and so for that reason, I would put it on this list. Alrighty, thank you guys so much for watching this video. It means the absolute world to me, and I really enjoyed making it for you. I hope I'll see you in the next one.